It's you know, madness, absolute madness. Let's see, make sure. Let me.
Tell me when I'm supposed to say something, Joe.
You could say anything you want when you're ready.
Okay.
Because believe it or not, I don't know if you could see it on screen that we're kind of split.
Yes, I see.
Yeah.
Yes. Hold on. Oh, this is a browser-based one. I was looking for the individual window. Okay, good. Okay. Yes, I see. We're split. Okay. So I mean, are we on? So that everybody knows, I just got that. I didn't see the link, and so I just got on this. So I'm kind of now catching up to a speeding train, and so let's go. What should we be talking about?
All right. So hello everybody. It's RodimusPrimal. I am here to talk about Flint Dille's awesome book, The Gamemaster. Almost famous in the Geek 80s. This book it's a really awesome read. I literally just finished reading it last night. And
you actually read the whole thing.
I read the whole thing cover to cover.
All right.
So and what was interesting about it was because I'm a hardcore Transformers fan. And so obviously I was like, all right, I want to hear about all the Transformers stuff, but then not realizing how much stuff you're involved in and how much stuff you literally everything from Dice to to Buck Rogers to everything else. It's awesome. It's definitely awesome. And I thought it was a very appropriate title, calling it the Gamemaster, not just because of the G.I. Joe episode, but also because of the fact that how you are integral to D&D. So it's you're chaotic good. That's what you would maybe I would consider you, right? Chaotic good or
good. That's I guess good. I like that. Well, that's why I wrote a book about it, because when you're telling, it's a very complex story. I mean, because the whole book's going to tell 4 years of my life, and it goes from games to TV shows to to movies to weird other projects to books, and it was just cool to lay it out because people ask about all the different parts of it, but they don't know about the other parts, and I guess that's what you discovered in the book is there are a lot of parts.
Well, it's not just that. It's because when I was reading it, I didn't realize it was actually a lot more linear than, I'm sitting there okay, we're jumping from D&D to writing for Ruby Spears to, back to playing D&D to, and I realized no, it's actually very linear, and it's actually everything interconnects in such a way. And it you can't just read one section and not realize how everything else is connected.
Okay. That is very flattering. That was basically, I mean, most of it was, for years I've been doing various different interviews and, DVD content and so on, but all on these different topics. And I dragged them all into the same file because a lot of the interviews are written down. I realized that 150 pages, and people actually liked hearing this stuff, right? Yep. And so I went to, and so I decided how to write this book, and it was all a bunch of fragmented stories that I'd post on Facebook when somebody asked me a question, right? And I didn't know how to order it, and then I realized the only way you can order it is by date. I mean, it's literally, it's by season. It's like spring, summer, winter, fall. But multiple things happen on different fronts in the different seasons, so it seems really ping-pongy.
Yeah, that's how it felt when I first read it. But then I realized how every single itty bitty piece lined into place, and it was so cool.
Oh, great! Well, thank
thank
my editor for that, and my wife for saying, okay, you got to have a structure to this book.
Yeah, if you don't realize, I almost think about it. It's interesting to think about how I'm trying to describe it in a way that makes sense, that because of things that don't seem linear, but it's almost like the movie Pulp Fiction, and how
my life's a lot like the movie Pulp Fiction.
Yeah. and how when if you actually watch it in the order that it's presented, it makes perfect sense that it was in that order.
Yeah.
You know, even though it's not chronological, but it is chronological.
Background, yeah, you're right.
Yep. So it all like lines up in that way, and how like everything bounces from here to there, but it actually does make sense that it does so, because if you didn't explain a certain part when you talked about the next thing, it was like, okay, what I don't get what he's saying there. You know what I mean? Like that's how, like, you know, as you read the book, it comes out that way. Someone wants to know, and I'm just going to bring this up on screen. Is it Dill or Dilly? Because I
very good question. Thank you, Hyper Casey. Yes, name is Dille.
Dille.
However, I feel like in my fraternity, they've known me for 40 years and pronounce it wrong, and I just kind of let it slide. But you know,
yeah, and you know me on Facebook, so like, you know, my actual name. My last name is Italian, so like I always everybody mispronounces it because of the CHI,
right?
And so it's actually Key, and so everyone called me, you know, Joey Keys. So like that was like,
wow.
yeah,
I wouldn't have that. I thought it was Chi.
Yeah, so it's Key.
There we go.
And it's how it's supposed to be pronounced. And everybody, because it's Italian thing, you know, it's like, you know, Italian from New York. It just, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, no, usually that stuff got like phoneticized and changed to like Ellis Island's. Just my ancestors were criminals long before Ellis Island got dumped off here. So, you know,
I'm not allowed to talk about it. But, you know, like from when my family came off the boat, they came to the country, and like we always made sure we pronounced it properly. And it's just, you know, but it's kind of funny that everybody mispronounces it. Everyone butchers everybody's name.
RodimusPrimal, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, Rodimus Prime. Well, that's because I'm a Rodimus Prime fan, and nobody understands my appreciation for the character. And it was pretty much you and Ron Friedman, I think, right? That pretty much created Rodimus Prime.
Rodimus Prime. It was like, you know, I mean, somebody at Hasbro created the idea that there's going to be somebody to succeed Optimus, obviously, and you know, and the whole idea is to do, you know, King Arthur kind of. You wanted the young guy to come in there, and because I'm from Chicago, I just based him on Jim McMahon. You know, because remember, that's the '85 Bears. I mean, you know, it's like these guys are winning.
If you're a football guy, I'm not a sports guy.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, so that was kind of what was going on. So that was in the air.
Gotcha. So like that's kind of like where I had asked you about it. I think on Facebook. I think like a year or so ago, like about how Ultra Magnus was kind of like the temporary leader, like kind of like King Saul, and your response was how he was King Saul, and Rodimus was more like David.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, David was the guy you were really waiting for, but there's always that guy in the middle, you know, who kind of holds the position. And it doesn't last long, and then the real guy comes. And David and Saul are pretty good. Yeah,
that's a pretty good comparison, especially considering David's life was not so perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, and nor was Rodimus's. I mean, Rodimus basically got Optimus killed.
Well, I can argue. I've argued that one with a lot of people, believe it or not, because a lot of people, they say like, "Oh, no, it's his fault, and his fault." It's like, well, he's responsible in the sense that he jumped in and it gave Megatron the upper hand. But
he was trying to do the right thing. I mean, he was not. He did not willfully do it. It wasn't incompetence. He didn't let anybody down. He didn't do anything bad. But had he not jumped in, Optimus may not have met the fate he did.
Which is interesting because in the Marvel Comics adaptation, and I always point this out to people, is that Megatron and Optimus have their fight, and Hot Rod's in the background, and Megatron still just picks up the gun and shoots him. So, you know, so there's no Hot Rod jumping in the comics. So
that was the opening scene in the book, was exactly about how that happened. And Gerber and I are sitting there saying, well, he's got to be a little bit responsible. I mean, we got to. Because then you have to have that burden on top of the character. Yeah, you know that he doesn't enter it totally clean. You know, that's the burden that Rodimus carries with him the rest of his life. Is he goes, you know, did I do anything wrong or bad? No, but if it hadn't been for me, it may be different. Yeah, but then on top of that, though, even Optimus, and I know I'm arguing semantics with Story, but I know it's like 30 years ago. But I know you've like kind of seen the movie going back and forth. But like I always say, like, because like Optimus is the one that called him Rodimus.
you know, he's the one that actually said like Rodimus, rise Rodimus Prime. And then in that Dark Awakening episode, which is the episode that you wrote in third season, you know, monsters, they use me as a weapon to destroy the very ones I loved in life. But you will save them. And he puts the Matrix back in his chest, Rodimus Prime. Like he like that was like, you know, passing the torch right there. And then Burden Hardest the Bear is I forgot who wrote that one in particular, but he loses the Matrix in that episode and he gains it back. But he says, not only the Matrix Cup, but also a part of myself. And that was like one of the last episodes of season 3 before they brought him back.
Right.
And that was like, you know, special to me because it was like overcoming your limitations, overcoming your faults, you know, and that's very, very, very parallel to my own life, you know, in like trying to overcome my own, you know, mishaps and missteps and trying to fill the shoes of somebody that everybody looked at like that they were the best. So it's all right. You know, so like that's kind of like why I love the character so much and why I took the moniker. And actually what happened was Beast Wars was a big thing at the time. And Optimus Primal was the leader of the Maximals. And it was like, well, what would happen if there was
Rodimus Primal?
Right. So I kind of took the name and then that's where it all came from. So it's kind of neat that like loving the, you know, Rodimus Prime and then liking Beast Wars at the same time, you know, is kind of a cool.
That opened the door for you.
Yeah, very much so. And that was like 20 years ago that I had started using the moniker. It wasn't until like 5 years ago that I started the YouTube channel. So, but you know, the book itself, like I loved the, you know, when I started like looking into like the history, some of the stuff that you were involved with, like how Buck Rogers was like such integral to your entire, you know, to your whole family.
Literally my DNA. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause your grandfather's middle name was Flint.
Yeah. It was John Flint Dille.
Okay. So, and he was the guy who published Buck Rogers, right? Is that how it worked?
Look, okay, this happened in 1929, or you know, so I wasn't there. But
of course not. None of us were.
So what I believe happened was a guy named Philip Francis Nolan had written a book called Armageddon 2419, and my grandfather had all these inventions. You know, I mean, he owned a newspaper syndicate, but he like had all these. He was this very sort of future kind of guy,
right?
And so he had all these inventions, and like I want to use them in something. And most of it, you know, he did everything that is in a newspaper every day in those days was syndicated. Mm-hmm. So columns, he did comics, he did funnies, and all that. And he read Amazing Stories with Armageddon 2419 and said, "There's a really good place to start." Okay, and so he started. So they really the first time Buck Rogers came out, it was pretty much a translation of Armageddon 2419. But it's what's you know, his name wasn't Buck Rogers, Anthony Rogers in that. And what wasn't in Armageddon 2419 was going into space or anything you think of as there are no rocket ships. There's nothing you think of as Buck Rogers. And so they did kind of a tear down on it. And that's when my grandfather really got involved in, is making a space hero. And that was also the first continuity action strip ever in any newspaper. Now it did the second time it was after the test release where they scrapped all the old stuff. Then it came out the same day as Tarzan, but this was the first thing that was really just designed as a newspaper. Tarzan was an adaptation of Edgar Rice Burroughs characters.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my introduction to Buck Rogers was the TV show with Jill Gerard.
Absolutely.
And which is funny because I actually met him last year. My dad and I went to a convention out in Pennsylvania. And my dad was like literally starstruck because he's a big sci-fi nut. Right. And like my dad just like, he like loves this stuff. Like, I mean, like I watched Buck Rogers, but I kind of saw like the special effects were kind of cheesy in my opinion. I was more into Knight Rider and Airwolf and A-Team. Right. And, you know, like, but like my dad was just like he was so happy to meet because it was both Joe Girard and what was the guy who I forgot. He's really short.
Felix Dille, the guy that played Tweaky.
Yes, yeah. He was there as well.
I never met Felix Dille. I met Buck, and I know Aaron. You know, but I mean not Gil, not Buck.
Okay, yeah, they were both there that day, and it was kind of cool to meet them both. And they're nice guys. It's just kind of like, neat. Like you almost get starstruck in a way. Cause like, you don't think of your, like, a lot of people say like, oh, you're some big YouTubers. I'm not a big YouTuber. I'm just a guy, like you get starstruck. Right. Anybody gets starstruck. And that's what I think you even kind of said in the book was like how you were, you were involved with all these people. Like I wonder how starstruck you were when you met George Lucas or, when you went to go.
That's what I said in the book. I was absolutely, at that moment, that was that he was the unquestioned king of Hollywood, and he'd never failed.
Yeah. And so like
Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, American Graffiti, and you get led into this, it was right as the ranch was opening up, the Lucas Ranch. As a matter of fact, I remember they just had a lot of stained glass window in there, and I remember having like glass fragments in my shoe. It was like not even all the way opened up when I went there. I
think you had said that like it was like it sparkled on the driveway, I guess, or something like that.
Oh, yeah. It was. You talk about it. That was his own hero journey. You leave San Francisco and you go up these mysterious roads past the Miwok gas station. You see like Star Wars source material on the way to it. And then there's this rock that always looked like Darth Vader's head to me.
That's what you were talking about was the Vader head, and I was like, interesting. But what I found was so cool, like as you were describing a lot of this stuff, was how you like described like all of Hollywood in a way. Like you talked about how you went down this like it was almost like you were like walking through it. I almost think about it that way whenever like sometimes you describe things in detail. Like I'm obviously from I live in Jersey, but like from New York, I can talk about going down 10th Avenue and stopping at Rocky's Pizza and going to the Javits Center or something like that. Like going up the escalator. I don't know if you're familiar with the subway, like right by the Javits Center. It's like in New York. It's
half a Toy Fair at the Javits
It's
Center.
Super steep, and like when you go up that escalator, like it's everyone gets scared, and I go, what are you guys so afraid of? Because it's like it's like almost like straight going up, and it's very much that kind of detail through California. So I found that kind of
his location was just so important in that story because there were so many cool locations in the it's like there was Lucasfilm, and then there was the Egg Company, which is this mysterious building they had at right outside Universal's lot. That was Lucasfilm's building, and we got to be in the Egg Company, and like, I'd run into Ed Asner, standing next to me in the men's room. It was really cool.
That's neat. Yeah. And you almost get, like I said, you get starstruck in a way.
Oh yeah. Starstruck the whole time. Cause what was weird about it, that's why it's called Almost Famous. If you ever saw the movie Almost Famous, but it's like every time I turned around, there was like some epic character, and I met them in just the most interesting ways.
Cool. Very cool. So from when you started writing, like one of your first gigs, I think, is when you started, I guess, with Ruby Spears. I guess that's how. One of the shows you said was it Puppies? Further Adventures of Puppies.
Yeah, the Puppy in Search of a Boy was the name of the whole show.
Okay,
that was my first ever script. Because I'd been hired for development.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know what development was. I'd been to film school and all that, but nobody ever used the phrase. Nobody told me in film school is what it was actually like being a writer. Like I'd meet real writers.
Mm-hmm.
You like meeting John Milius. Okay. That's not a typical writer experience. Okay. I didn't know there was such thing as development, and that, I don't know what I thought had happened, but, and then Mark Jones, who was kind of a really interesting character himself. He was working with both Stephen Cannell, these were doing the shows that you like. There's Knight Rider and Glenn Larson.
Mm-hmm.
A-Team. Glenn Larson was doing A-Team, I believe. And, so Mark Jones was working with, and sometimes story editor with, the guys who you grew up liking. But he was my story editor, producer, whatever he was. I never knew his title. He was just kind of above everybody else in the writer area, but nobody really understood what he did. But he was supervising me on The Puppy, and that was my test drive script. Basically, he just gave me all the iconography from North by Northwest and said, "Go write a script." Planes strafing the dogs, biplanes, they're running across Mount Rushmore. And I was saying, "Is that how you do it? You just like from Hitchcock?" Well, okay, all right, I'll do that.
That's cool.
Yeah, that was trial. That was like the break-in project.
Yeah, and as you were, I guess you were working, continue making scripts for Ruby Spears. You ended up like almost getting into Lucasfilm. I guess that's kind of how it ended up turning into.
Well, I
Like you,
ended up working for Lucasfilm.
okay,
I ended up working at Lucasfilm. What happened was I was at Ruby Spears, and Charlie Lippincott, who just died a couple weeks ago, great guy. He was marketing head on Star Wars, I believe. And maintained a relationship with Lucasfilm, and so he recommended me, and they hired me. And I was the first story editor on a show called Droids. Paul Dini and I went up there.
right.
And Paul Dini's done a lot of stuff since then, the Batman stuff and things. But Paul Dini and I went up to Lucasfilm, and Paul did really well. He was up there for 2 years. I did not do so well. I was up there for about 2 months. And I think it's in the book. It was Lucasfilm that recommended me to Steven Spielberg 4 years later.
Right.
How much
that's what I found so awesome about that was that how that was so integral. Like if you weren't in Lucasfilm, you wouldn't have been part of Amblin Entertainment, right? That's what it was.
That was in all fairness, I was in Amblin because that was like the final checkpoint. It's like, well, we'll vouch. It was really Lisa Henson who I met at a party that got me into Amblin.
Okay.
And that was one of those things where it's an LA analogy, but I mean, if you're driving out Wilshire and you get like 7 green lights in a row, that's what that was. Just everything went right. For all the times it goes wrong, that was one of those times everything went right.
That and pushing a car out of a driveway.
Yeah, pushing a car out of a driveway. Well, yeah, I mean, but think about how much turned on the fact that we didn't just say, I don't want to go to this thing anyway. Okay. And we actually pushed, this boob friend of mine, is like, crashed on my floor, parks his car, blocking me in, and then doesn't leave the keys. And I was more than willing to send his car down to, some ditch and, like if it had floated all the way to Santa Monica and gone off of the pier, that would have been fine with me. But we actually pushed it out of the way. We actually went to the party, and, Linda, who was my girlfriend at the time, she met the Disney guy. I mean, we ended up with the same project. She walked away doing Disney Babies, which whatever happened to that, but she later wrote Beauty and the Beast and Lion King and Maleficent, and she's still writing stuff. She's on the cover of Writers Guild magazine, as a matter of fact.
Cool.
Let's go. And I end up writing for Steven Spielberg, and all because we showed up at the right party at the right minute, and then the right stuff happened.
Yeah, when the doors open or doors close, like I almost think about because I was supposed to go to the TFCon in Florida before this whole lockdown happened. And I was like, I'm going to get a chance to try and meet this one or try to meet that one or try to meet this one. And, that all went by the wayside. And it's like, oh man, because you try to open doors where you can. And it was very much like a game of chance, like you're rolling the die.
No, it's one long die roll. And, sometimes they all roll against you too, you just have to do it. I mean, that a small part of what that book is about is you have good fortune, you have bad fortune, but it's really a story about being any kind of a freelancer or writer or anything else. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Because enough bad stuff happened too, but the good stuff.
And then
bad stuff. And so, that's why I wrote a book about it.
It was well worth the read. And when you finally got over to Sunbow, and starting with G.I. Joe, like that, you opened the door for a lot of things in G.I. Joe in ways that, I think expanded the universe. I think you, Buzz Dixon, everybody was so important to the stories. And you guys had a USS Flag as a coffee table.
That was our coffee table. I mean, because the thing was like 7 feet long. I mean, it seemed like maybe it was only 6, but I mean, it's a big thing with all these attachments and everything. And we didn't have a coffee table. We had a short coffee table, so we just put this on top of it, and there's like ashtrays sitting on the USS Flag. And if I have a geek regret, it is that I didn't just take it with me when I left. Because I have no idea what happened to that. Maybe they packed it up and sent it back to New York. I don't know what happened to it, but there was like, I remember going out of the office, looking at it, but we had basically the Javits Center escalator was our stairs. But, and I mean, I carry the USS Flag down, these stairs and over to a parking parking garage across the street. Maybe later. I never did. I regret that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you probably could still get your hands on one if you really, really wanted a USS flag.
That USS flag,
with a coffee stain still on it.
The coffee stain, the cigarette burn, the whole thing. You got to have that on it.
Definitely, because then it brings back every bit of memory that you have when you're still there.
I mean, it was kind of our meeting. It's like we had a regular conference table, but then we had a couple chairs off to the side, and it was just sort of sitting there. It's kind of our side table.
So when you came into G.I. Joe, was it, did you come in as a story editor, or you were the story writer, like as you came into it?
I came in. Okay, what happened was, so I left Lucasfilm, and I was finishing up the books with Gary. And you see, that's what you were saying at the beginning, is you have to put all that stuff layers together.
Yep.
I had something to do, and Gary and I were doing the Sagard books. And Steve Gerber, because Gerber may have been the best story editor of an age, but he was certainly not the most punctual. And he called up and he said, I've fallen behind on G.I. Joe. And it's like, oh, no, I'm shocked. And he said, hey, he come in and pinch story edit for me. It's like, great. Because G.I. Joe that was one of those projects, I mean, it was different than Transformers from the point of view that I walked in, read my first G.I. Joe script, Steve and I watched the miniseries together, Ron's miniseries, and I got it. There was nothing I didn't get about the show. It was like effortless to write it. And, and Steve and I had shockingly similar sensibilities. I mean, we thought of it as a James Bond movie with, 125 characters in it, as opposed to, we didn't think of it just as a military show.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I looked at it as it had the military, it had the counter terrorist, but it also had a lot of fun stuff, like specifically your episode, the Gamemaster, is the one episode with Baroness in a bikini.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, that was just fun to do. Yeah. Because remember, Ron laid the firmament. You know what I mean? And that was the template. I mean, you had the big device, and it's got 3 parts, and Cobra's putting it together, and there are a bunch of try-fails. It was a 5-part miniseries, but there are a bunch of try-fails, but eventually the good guys win, and he did a great job with that. But after like episode 15, like that, you've got to go somewhere else.
Right.
And in fact, the characters just started getting more outlandish and colorful. And the ideas, I mean, you have to, what's really cool about it, and I talked about it in the book a lot, and that is, the other thing that was happening was all these comic book guys were coming from the East Coast. Okay. Like Marv Wolfman showed up later on Transformers, and Roger Slifer, joined. He wrote a really early episode. Len Wein and Frank Miller, though he didn't really work on the stuff, but the beginning of the book was, figuring out the Optimus scene with Frank while we're helping him with the Dark Knight. It's just one of those moments, but anyway, so all of a sudden they're bringing comic book ideas. It's Steve and Mark, comic book guys. Buzz was always extremely well informed in comics. Doug and I were probably more similar in that sense, and that I wasn't really a comics guy. What I was a game guy, and that brought something else. It brought a sense of world building and rules and and stuff like that. I mean, I used to like diagram the battles out. I mean, like I can't draw. I'm the only person ever in the animation business who can't draw. I can't diagram battles. And so, we do that. So there were a lot of different influences, and that's part of what made it cool.
It's kind of like my one friend. Whenever we would play D&D, and he would try to draw out a campaign board, where we were supposed to be. It would look like, I'm like, dude, it's not that difficult to draw, and he's having this wonderful time trying to draw a game board, and which is kind of. Go ahead.
Some people do that. I mean, some people draw these. None other than Vin Diesel showed me his D&D world he built. It was the size of Greyhawk.
Wow.
And he still has it framed on his wall, and it's like, my recollection is like, 6 feet by 5 feet, maybe 5 feet by 4 feet, but it's huge, and that's what he and his buddies gamed on in high school.
Cool. I mean, what was your relationship with the Gygax family? Like with the whole, I was trying to piece that together. I guess Lorraine is your sister.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, so it wasn't clear in the book.
Yeah, it wasn't. It didn't feel like it was clear. Or maybe I overread it and I went, didn't understand it.
Basically, one of my rules in the book is I just didn't want to stir up any controversies or say anything bad about anybody or cast aspersions. But it was a pretty ugly situation.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, I met Gary totally separately. Okay.
Okay.
I think I say all this in the book, but I'll clarify it for now. I met Gary in '82 with Joey Thompson.
Okay.
And we immediately liked each other. And he wrote me a letter a few weeks later. I'm moving out to LA and I want to write movies. Do you want to do it with me? And I said, I'm in. Okay, and design games and all that stuff. Because I'd always wanted to design games. I had no idea how to do it. They didn't have game schools. I couldn't hey, I'm going to go to game school. Somebody did that. And I knew how to go to movie school, but I didn't know how to go to game school. So Gary came out. We got along great. The first order of business, we had to find a mansion. How bad is that, riding around in a chauffeured car with Gary Gygax looking at mansion in Beverly Hills? And we finally found the right mansion. And we were just endlessly plotting stories and thinking about game ideas. And it was great. Now, I couldn't make a living doing that. Only Gary could make money doing that. So that's when I was doing G.I. Joe and Transformers. I think it actually came out. I was still at Ruby Spears. Yes, definitely, I was still at Ruby Spears. Okay. And TSR was a phenomenon. There's a magazine called Ink. Tell me if this gets boring. If I get
no. Everybody right now in the chat is loving this. They're eating this stuff up.
Good. Yeah, but you could you could hit the pause button on me. The rewind. I do a lot of stuff. Right now, I'm interpolating on the book. Okay, so what happened was there was an Ink magazine sitting on the coffee table, which was not the flag, a regular coffee table up at D&D, which showed TSR as the fastest growing privately held company in America. Okay, it was probably at that point, it probably was already.
You'd said that in the book too, but yeah, go ahead.
On the pages. But the point is that's how they thought about themselves. And so they talked to these management consultants. There's a weird thing, they had the perfect little thing going. But then all of a sudden, when old Jed's a millionaire, you shoot up the gold, the bubbling crude, then all of a sudden, all sorts of people show up in the world who, are not helpful. And, Gary would half believe consultants they had in would say, yes, if you keep growing at this rate, you'll exceed the U.S. Treasury by, in 2 years. The real world
hyperinflate their egos.
Hyperinflate their ego, and they overstaffed. At one point, I've been told there were 90 people named Bloom with working at the company, and they a lot of things happened, and there were a lot of structural things in the beginning they probably should have done differently. But anyway, so round about '84, around the time we were out there, we're sitting in the mansion, and Gary's simultaneously, who doesn't want to be in Beverly Hills? It was, it was great.
My brother-in-law lived out there for a little while, but
yeah, he's living on a mansion at the very top of Beverly Hills. But anyway, so he's up there doing that, and the company's running into problem after problem financially. And one day I walked in. I remember it. This may or may not be true, and we had to ask Ernie. But I remember walking in, and Ernie was like, there's something clearly wrong. I'd walk in the main front door, and he's standing there. He said, those bank just pulled our line of credit today. I didn't even know what that meant. Okay. It's I've never told bank lines credits for corporations.
I think you were saying you one of the things you said in the book was get good with money. Cause your mom was doing your taxes. So was kind of
she's looking at it. Well, that was, that because I was still living like a college student.
Right.
And
that's why
I bought the house I'm sitting behind me right now. Was right then, and that's why I never sell them. And if you want to be any kind of a creative person, live far below your means and expect there to be a lot of lean times. And that's my only advice for today. But anyway, so what happened? Our line of credit was pulled. And I didn't know how that manifests. Does that mean somebody comes and repossesses the sand table? I didn't know what that meant. Mm-hmm. And Gary and I were talking. He was more serious about it, and he was going back and forth. There was evidence something was up. I just didn't know, what it was. And I said to him, look, if you want to, you can talk to my sister. She, in the 80s, people used to do corporate turnarounds. Okay. And she does corporate turnarounds, and she might be able to fix the problem. And so he indeed went back. She lived in Chicago. So he went back there. They met up, and, he thought, yeah, she's really smart, because she is really smart. And indeed, she turned it around. And we're sitting there 2 months later, and he's talking about how great she is. And I said, I remember saying this. We're standing there looking out at all of Sunset Boulevard in LA in the distance. And I remember saying, well, you're going to think she's really great until she figures out you're the problem.
Oh, boy.
Employees that didn't really do much, and, and all that. And it was a problem. It was just a big money hole, money pit. And a bunch of stuff happened, and where the controversial part comes in, this is the 12-hour conversation I don't want to have, and that's why I'm so oblique about the book.
You could be as oblique as you need to be if you feel like I'm overstepping my bounds.
There aren't really any bad guys in the story, but it got very bad. Okay, and at one point, allegedly, Gary was going back basically to take over the board, take over the company and all that, and fire my sister and replace her with, kind of what the Blooms were doing. And she said, we can't do that. I just bought out your two partners. So basically, he now had controlling interest in the company. And the scandal and controversy always was, did I know? And the fact of the matter is, I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Everybody who has talked to my sister for more than 3.5 minutes knows she's not going to tell me this stuff.
Yeah.
By the time I found out, to me, the solution was obvious. And that is that Gary, should stay at TSR and basically have Stan Lee's role at Marvel. Stan Lee at that point, even in some ways, even at the end of his life, he was at Marvel and did as much or as little creative work as he wanted to, but he was the symbol of it. Gary was the symbol of TSR.
Yeah.
He did like the wizard on the box. Why would you ever, if you're Mick and Keith, don't wreck the band over this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you guys can work together, because no part of Gary, I think, ever really wanted to run a company. Okay, I just think he was just not a business guy. And that's not
creative types usually don't want to be a part of, they don't want to be sitting there not be part of this corporate mindset. You want to be creating stuff. You want to make stuff.
Precisely. That is why anytime you're in a situation, like at TSR, it started getting really corporate. And if you're a creative person, you're kind of get out or be doing something else. Have something else on the side you're doing, because it, all of a sudden the company, and there were a lot of problems. It wasn't, they had a lot of lawsuits back from the early days. And so, the company became all about lawyers and finance and funding and all that, and not about, hey, let's make really great games.
Right.
And so, great product came out, but I think a lot of product was rushed. And, through the rest of the time, because Lorraine kept it going, to her credit, she sold it in 1996. That was 12 years.
Right.
After it was effectively in chapter 10 and a half.
Yeah. That's when I think second edition came out. And then third edition was Wizards of the Coast version.
Second edition came out. I recall it from pretty early in the 80s. Second edition was around the time I met Gary, I believe. Mm-hmm. Now, if we had, someone like Jim Ward on this, he would correct me. But it's for the purpose of this conversation, they were pretty much, happened at the same time. Gotcha.
So, while this was all happening at the same time, and you were playing games like crazy, that was one of the cool things.
Incredibly cool, and everybody come over. We'd have this chainmail game that never ended for 2 years. We'd write new scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same stuff. You'd have some straggling army from the last battle trying to get out, get off the board.
I was always a paladin, or a knight with that was always a tank. That was my always the way that I was, and I was always lawful good, just straight up, always that's what character I would always play, no matter what campaign we were on. I was always the knight, whenever I wanted to be.
And well, Chainmail. I mean, obviously, it's really just a pure medieval miniatures game, but we superimposed role playing on it, and I mean, we were just what's really cool about that era, and that's what I was trying to get across in the book is we didn't know you couldn't do stuff,
right?
And there weren't any rules, and we were just making it up as we went along, and some of it ended up being actual product that influenced the world.
Yeah, I mean, even so much so that, and just to help steer the conversation so that it we have a flow, is as you were playing all these games, I found it so intriguing that was your inspiration for not only like you saw gaming as like life. That's kind of like how I saw the theme of the book was like gaming was life, and like because like real life is like that. Sorry, go ahead.
Life is a big game, and it's just not that well designed, but you got to fix the design.
Right, exactly. And then you ended up writing the G.I. Joe episodes, like 3 of them, right? So it was Gamemaster, Audit Cobra, and
the Skeletons in the Closet.
Okay, was that the one with Destro's origin, or where?
Yeah, Destro's origin and his ancient familial ties. It's really funny because on G.I. Joe, I was never supposed to write script. I mean, when I was story editing it, we'd come up with a story together with the writer, but there wasn't time. We were doing 65 episodes a year.
Right.
TV shows like 13. Nowadays, a streaming show is like 9.
It's like 6 or even like 4.
So, there wasn't really, the only time I would write episodes is, as I was saying in the book, is when things fell out. Like, see, we got a draft that was just not fixable, or some crisis came up in somebody's life and they weren't going to be able to turn in their script. I mean, in order for me to actually write something, there had to be something, something had to go wrong.
And it ended up being some of the best episodes of both shows, so.
Well, okay, but in fairness to all the other writers, you have to remember, first of all, I'd edited 50 episodes. So, I mean, I knew the characters about as well as you could.
Yeah.
I had a next number of ideas. Everybody it was such a great team. It was about as good a creative team you had as everybody was just in the business of facilitating you and doing what you wanted to do.
Yeah. And, some of my favorite episodes are written by a lot of those guys too. So it's not like, I'm not saying that there was anything wrong with any of them. I'm just saying that some of your episodes, and I'm not trying to flatter you, but I'm just trying to say like those episodes are good. So
and G.I. Joe was also really easy. Transformers never wasn't hard. That doesn't mean it was less good or less bad, or I liked it less, but it was always hard. G.I. Joe, literally all 3 of the scripts you talked about had to have been written inside a 24 to 48 hour period.
Wow. So it's just
script fell out. We need something board by Friday. Okay. But the point is, it was so internalized at that point. It's not like I had to learn the characters or figure out what the format for the show was.
Yeah.
And I just say, hey, I want to do one with like an H.P. Lovecraft Cthulhu sitting in the basement. And I don't know this to be true, but I guess I was starting on Inhumanoids at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, oh, well, let's get a monster in G.I. Joe, because I always thought of a G.I. Joe and Transformers and Inhumanoids as all being one world.
That Gem and
playing somewhere. Hector Ramirez was showing up everywhere.
I love that Hector Ramirez, the news reporter who always showed up in whatever show he could, and he was like.
And at that point, Geraldo Rivera had this ridiculous show where he had this big debacle at that point where they had found a Al Capone safe, allegedly, or a vault where all of Al Capone's money was going to be in there. So they opened up the vault, and it turns out that there are a couple booze bottles in there, and there's nothing. So it was just too easy to make have Hector Ramirez show up in our shows.
That's kind of funny because like I think Al Capone's cell is in the East State Penitentiary in Philly. And you walk through it and you're like, it's not really anything. It's just a jail cell. What's so special about this place? Like,
right.
Yeah.
No, and Al Capone's.
Yeah, because it's Al Capone. Like he's a mobster. He killed people. Like, like it's like, why are you making this guy a hero? And I would say the same thing about another character that made somebody walk out on Transformers, and that was Abdul Fakati.
Abdul Fakati, yeah. Oh, poor Jason. Yeah, it's really funny because I think Buzz created Abdul Fakati, I think, for Thief in the Night.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was also in Five Faces.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I brought him back in Five Faces, was when Casey. I can't remember when Casey Kasem, left after 5 phases for Carbamia, Thief in the Night. But yeah, he wrote these letters. I mean, first of all, it's not like we're slurring any ethnicity. This was Muammar Gaddafi.
Yeah, he's a dictator. He's a murderous dictator.
A murderous dictator, Muammar. Fakadi. And I never understood Casey. Casey was always, of all the actors, he was always the crabbiest. I remember sitting down once, like my entire childhood, you turn on the radio on the weekend, you hear America's Top 40, and it was Casey Kasem counting down the top 40.
One of my local radio stations actually replays his stuff every Sunday morning.
Great at it. And it was a great show, and it was like an icon of my childhood. And I remember sitting out in the green room one time and saying, oh, I really like America's Top 40. Kind of like, fan kind of stuff. And he said, yeah, I don't like rock and roll. And that was all he had to say.
Wow.
Yeah, he was, he had very little interest in engaging people, because most of the actors were really interesting. Because there's a lot of time where you're waiting between takes, or it's breaks, or the tech guys are adjusting the mics and the mic level. You're hearing a lot of, hey, what's that sound in there? A lot of that. So you're sitting around talking to the actors, and they're all fascinating. Scatman Crothers is telling stories about working with. Well, he was telling a story about working with Stanley Kubrick, and then did that make it into the book? I can't remember.
No, it didn't. It didn't. No, but Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson and him were like really big friends, and it was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and The Shining. The two of them worked together, and they.
Great. I mean, everybody in those casts was just great. I mean, they're just. That's part of what I want, that kind of time back again, because it was like this period where everybody in the world was in a good mood.
Yeah, I miss the. I was a kid in the 80s, so and I miss the 80s too. Like, my wife is a 90s person, and she loves the 90s stuff, like 90s music, 90s everything, and I'm all about the 80s. I just completely nostalgic about the 80s, and it's I was a kid, and one of my favorite things was not only just watching a lot, all these shows, but when we moved to Jersey, my family still was in New York, so we were traveling to New York all the time. My dad worked in Manhattan, and he's a 9/11 survivor too. So, New York was inbred with us. So we just everything about entertainment was just, part of our lives. And my dad being a sci-fi nut, it was just cool stuff. And so that's why I love that era. It was just a fun era to live in.
Yeah, it was. And part of it is, I just want that back.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew it at the time. I mean, we knew, boy, this is really fun. It's the world almost totally made sense, and technology was starting to come in, but it was kind of controllable. You had to buy a little box that did something. It didn't. You didn't have the internet following you around all day.
Yeah, and everybody's sitting there looking at their phones all the time, and in technology.
Yeah, pick up my phone desk.
So,
I think I'll look at my phone.
So speaking of fun times, and just thinking about what you were talking about in the book was about how a lot of the shows in the era were empowering boys, empowering men in the era, like all the shows that came out, because you were now allowed to do stuff. Like G.I. Joe, you were finally able to punch somebody
with real fists.
With real fists, right?
To me, I'm coming to story edit the show. You can hit people with a real fist. Children's television at the networks was just so restrictive that it was great training ground, because you had to figure out how to do action adventure where you couldn't really have action or adventure. But it was great. Yeah,
and it's definitely from He-Man to Transformers, G.I. Joe to, even Knight Rider and Airwolf and He-Man and Magnum P.I. It's
everything was fun.
Yeah.
A-Team was at moonlighting. It was just, it was just in the movies. Think about that. You're with the Star Wars movies finished in the 80s, Raiders of the Lost Ark, then the whole action film, the Terminator and T2 and there's just enough digital coming in, or the effects had had a huge upgrade.
Mhm.
But you were kind of in the sweet spot where they still had to carry it off with actual performances and dialogue and stuff like that. You couldn't carry a movie on effects.
Yeah, I mean, we had what, Predator, Commando, everything.
Oh,
Like it's just like
just on and on. Total Recall. T2 came out in the 80s, didn't it? Yeah, I think it did.
T2, I think was 91.
And then you had Lethal Weapon.
84 was, I could be wrong, but yeah, Lethal Weapon. 84 was Terminator 1. What's that?
All the buddy films. That was the other thing.
Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
But then
the comedies too, yes.
one of my
kid films.
One of my favorite movies was The Goonies. So like that was another fun 80s fun movie. But I was thinking about like that era and Buck Rogers.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about like, you had talked about how in the, everybody talks about the origin story of Buck Rogers and how no one talks about how he would live in the 25th century.
Well, okay, so for everybody out there that doesn't know, I mean, Buck Rogers in like less than a minute. Basically, it is a guy from the 20th century. Okay, the original comic strip he came from 1929, and in Gil Gerard he came, and I can't remember when he came from. But he came from pretty much our period. Came from the 80s, right? Mm-hmm. And something happens, and he ends up in the 25th century. And he's like the only guy in the 25th century from the 20th century. And he has adventures there. Right. And, and what's really interesting about it is, I mean, imagine you're me and your entire family, entire life, Buck Rogers has been in your family. Mm-hmm. And everybody in their pet monkey, it comes and has a pitch for how they would do Buck Rogers. And what's very interesting being me, this would happen like, I'm sitting there doing Transformers and I'm doing G.I. Joe, or I'm working for George Lucas or whatever. But when it comes to Buck Rogers, everybody would pitch me like I fell off some turnip truck which I just started finding annoying. I mean, from Bundor Falls, Iowa, and I've never developed a show before. And they come up with their take. I mean, I could do a whole book on different takes people giving me.
God, have you ever seen Futurama or?
Oh yeah, Futurama. Is a perfect parody version of that.
Yeah, definitely. The whole wake up in the future, you're a fish out of water, but he's just some delivery guy. But
you can look at Guardians of the Galaxy as kind of Buck Rogers too. I mean, it's a guy from the 80s, right?
Yep.
Ends up in this weird future galaxy. And I mean, he's a kid, and but he's a different kind of character, but nevertheless, it's sort of the same idea, and has all the same problems. The thing with Buck Rogers is it begins. In the original comic strip, it begins where he wakes up in a post-apocalyptic dystopian future, right? Okay. On Earth, right? And everybody has a really elaborate story about who he was when he was on Earth, and who he was, who he was when he got to, and how he survives and why Earth needs him and all that. Nobody ever says, okay, what happens when he gets to space? What happens when he gets to the 25th century? Who is he and what's he do? That's like two sentences. Well, he joins the, Earth Resistance Force, and okay.
But if he was in the future, and just thinking about his character, if he was in the future and he was maybe, let's say, from the 20th century, where men were able to stand and be like from the 80s, basically, and would wake up, he would be trying to be like, let's bring back some heroism. Let's put on our rocket packs. Let's take out our laser guns. Let's fly out into space and let's take these bad guys down.
I mean, you have to. I mean, the whole trick, and this is true of any character, not just Buck Rogers, but you have to create a world that needs your character. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Yeah. In other words, Gotham City's got to be this city with a lot of bad, bizarre crime in order to have a guy that looks like a bat running around solving the crimes. Mm-hmm. Metropolis needs Superman. Okay, and so you have to create a future that needs Buck Rogers.
Yep.
But that was always the Buck.
And
Rogers.
that's the thing about the character. Like if he was to show up from a person from now, he would be kind of like the guy that if this culture now it like proceeded its way to make the next 500 years like fall apart, he would need to be there to be that hero that nobody, you know, that men were no longer allowed to be the hero anymore. And now 500 years later, here comes this, you know, this hero, you know, that's unapologetic, doesn't care, is not going to stop. He's going to make sure that these bad guys are taken down. You know,
needs that hero.
Yeah, I mean, think of Demolition Man is another fun example of that. Like, you know, where wakes up in the future, and you know, like they have like the tablet that says like, you know, stand down. He's not standing down. Like, you know, like like it would very much be like that.
It's a really compelling thing because it you know, what was so exciting about it when Buck Rogers came out in the 30s is nobody did anything like that. There, you know, nobody was writing books about in the future, but it's like you get to go to the future. That was the vicarious thrill, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and so no, it's really it's a fun puzzle to figure out if I ever do it.
Yeah, but that's kind of like where I saw like Buck Rogers when you talked about that in the book. I was like, but if he would be, this is what, you know, he would probably be, because like I think about the world, you know what I mean? I think about the world that he's living in. It's exactly what you said in the book. And that's exactly what you were talking about there, is that like you're building a world for these characters to live in, because the world is just as important. Like James Bond is not just James Bond. James Bond is in a world where, you know, where all these spies are happening. You know, it very much the end narration to Knight Rider is, you know, to season 1 where they say, in a dangerous world of a man who just like that's pretty much it.
And James Bond, you know, they don't have Walmarts in James Bond world. Everybody, you know, lives in a mansion somewhere and stuff to them. And you know, all life is resorts, and nobody looks like a real person. And yeah, I mean, that's James Bond world, and it feels
exactly. Good. Yeah, so we're gonna start shifting this story, this conversation to Transformers and GI Joe, because everybody's asking about Transformers and GI Joe in the comments, and it's like we're gonna talk about Transformers, like because we were talking about Scatman, and we went on a Buck Rogers tangent. So before we move on to that, what was the Scatman story that you were about to tell about the you said it was not in the book?
Well, the Scatman story was okay. Scatman was in 2 movies back to back. I think it was back to back, but he was in The Shining
and the Cuckoo's Class, right?
Right. And then he was in, I think it was Bronco Billy. It was one of Clint Eastwood's. I think it was sort of one of his 80s kind of silly films. You know, Every Which Way You Can, and you know, Any Which Way You Can, and Every Which Way But Loose, and Bronco Billy. It was one of those. And I can't remember which he just shot, but he was telling the difference was that in The Shining, he was saying Stanley Kubrick made him walk across the frame in front of the Overlook Hotel through the snow 60 takes before he walking just the way he wanted him to walk. You know, Scatman, you know, I mean, you know, he was moving slowly. He was not a young man at that point, right?
Right.
And they finally got and they had to reset the snow. Imagine that you have a shot where you have to, like, he walks across the snow and then, oh no, I want another take. And then they reset the snow and turn on the snow machine. And he's telling that story. And then he's saying, doing something for Bronco Billy. And Clint Eastwood, you know, he's doing, you know, like what he thinks is the rehearsal. They do the scene. And he said, good cut, print. And Eastwood said, you don't want me to do it? I mean, Scatman said, you don't want me to do it again? And he leans out from behind the camera and says, no, I'm not Stanley. Very funny, you know, because you could not have 2 more different, you know, Academy Award-winning directors.
Scatman seemed like the kind of guy that, like, you could literally, like, you know, just listen to him tell stories all day. Like, just like he was just.
I mean, he was jazz. I mean, there was very little line between the guy who'd be talking to us in the green room and the character. Almost.
I mean, and it kind of showed in every one of the characters that he played, like even not just in the movies, but like even like in Transformers playing Jazz, like, you know, Jazz was just like everybody loves that character, you know, like just
Scatman was Jazz, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, that's what he was like, you know, I mean, that was a perfect mix, and we had a lot of that in those shows, you know, perfect mix of the talent and the character they were playing. I mean, Chris Latta was Cobra Commander, and he was Starscream. I mean, they're the same guy, you know.
Yeah, and very much Wheeljack and Sparkplug and
Oh yeah.
And he did the cause for Laserbeak, if I remember correctly, like Chris Latta specifically, because I know the roars for Ravage were Frank.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
Okay, Frank Welker. You talk about a totally different animal. I mean, Chris Latta was a stand-up comedian that I think Joe Bacall saw in some Comedy Store in Greenwich Village or somewhere, and saw this guy who is amazingly talented and brought him out. But he was like a totally different animal in the recording studio than the voice actors still talk about being around Chris. However, that having been said, Chris kind of defined the tone of our shows, and he's a big part of why they were different. He just brought an energy. I mean, the room was just different when he was there. Everybody else, I mean, Frank Welker is the most talented human being I've ever seen doing anything, and is the consummate professional. I mean, we'd be doing Insecticons.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There wasn't a lot of voice process. Tell me, is this boring or is this?
Oh, we're loving this. Everyone's loving this, like, because we're talking about Transformers. So it's
there wasn't a lot of voice processing necessary on Insecticon. You'd sit there with Frank Welker, and it would be like, okay, you're a robot. Here's your line, whatever it's some bad line. Anyway, give him a line, and then in the auditions, and then it would be, can you make that a little more insect? And there'd be more insect. I can't even do what he does with his voice, and there'd be more, but a little more electronic. And he could, you would have a guy who would be insect, electronic, and a character, and it was all tunable on the fly, and it sounded like it had gone through a processor.
I wonder sometimes there's some episodes where Frank or Chris or any of them were playing multiple characters at once, and you'd watch. I wonder how they kept their conversations and kept in character and kept the voice, like was able to switch from voice to voice to voice. Like
what we would do is every line was discreetly. This was one of the once again. Tell me if people in the comments are saying, "Will you stop talking about this?" But the way the recording worked is usually you would get every line discreetly. Okay, in other words, you would say the actor would say the line and would have it cleanly with a head and a tail on it. So you would then edit it to the film later on.
Okay.
What we did though is if we had time and everybody was there, we would have a read through of the script first while the engineers are putting all the tech together.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get the read through, and a lot of times, because these guys would come in. I mean, it was like being inside the Comedy Store. It was not, they'd be making up their own lines, and this was a lot of stuff would be like late night at the the belly room of the Comedy Store. This would be not suitable for children's television. They had their own take on the line, and they'd be throwing in ad libs. But a lot of times the ad libs were really good and really funny.
Have you ever seen the Thundercats outtakes? It's actually on the internet. You can find it. And the Thundercats outtakes, they actually have some of the stuff that they say, like what that am I saying here? Like,
that's what it was. I mean, I think Wally, was like, wouldn't like, out these. I mean, you'd be arrested for saying stuff like that. Like one of them was saying in those days. And this is men and women alike. I mean, it's like, I'm sitting there thinking, I didn't know someone could talk like this. I didn't know you could say those words.
It's funny.
But they would also ad lib, and it would be on point, and they'd just be throwing stuff in. And I always I listened to it. And I thought this is great, because what it does is the thing with animation is animation's totally controlled. Nothing gets drawn. It's like when you're writing an animation script, you have to mention everybody who's in the scene, because it's not like they're going to cast an actor and you notice, oh, this guy's sitting around over here not doing anything. Let's give him something to do. You have to. It's very planned.
Mm-hmm.
And so the problem is then to make it feel human and chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Same thing as with games, game scripts and stuff like that I do later on. If it's a digital medium, it's so planned that a lot of times it can feel really stiff. Okay, and so what we started doing more and more, and everybody resisted this in the beginning, is I realized a lot of times I want the feeling of these read-throughs they do without the obscenity and the the horrifying imagery. But they would I want that feeling in the show. And so it's a natural fight between the technical cleanness of getting the perfect take and the spontaneity and interaction of the actors.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys were all great. Yeah, I mean, like Greg Berger himself could just sit there and amuse you, or any of these guys. I mean, I don't want to like mention names because I'm not mentioning someone else's name, and they're just as good. Yeah, they're all.
I think Transformers fans and GI Joe fans, we appreciate the work that they've done and the work that you guys have done as writers too. So it's like it's just so many of them like did a lot of work, and it for us as fans, it's like we come to appreciate it because like we imitate it. Now we try and like imitate the voice, like we try to make the scratchy Megatron voice, which. Like my daughter likes to watch it too now, and she's like, "Can you do Megatron's voice?" So like so it's kind of like funny because
there are two I ought to mention. Not that I don't want everybody out there to buy my book, but if you want to know a lot about the voice stuff, Neil Ross wrote a really good book, and Dan Julvason also wrote a really interesting book about Bumblebee. They're at the opposite end. Dan's book you can read in one sitting, where Bill's book, it says, about the size of what an old phone book used to be like. But I mean, but it's incredibly detailed and tells you. So if anybody's really interested in the voice stuff, Neil's book is really good. Read mine first, right? But
of course, if you want to see the background stuff, definitely.
Yeah, right. That's a big one. Those guys and Ron Friedman wrote a great book about I Killed Optimus Prime. And what's really funny is. The voice you get in that book really is Ron. I mean, what a vet that guy was. All right. But so what I wanted. So, and finally, by the end of Transformers, and at that point was mostly concerned with Inhumanoids. I mean, I never totally left Joe. I never totally left Transformers.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie sort of hovered over all this stuff. But I was off doing Inhumanoids. And Inhumanoids, I told Wally, look, I want to get the actors in here in the show who are willing to do it ensemble. And I want you guys let's just try recording it and have people read through the script and play off each other. And we didn't do that all the time. And also for Visionaries at the end, we did. But, we didn't do that every time. And you get something and you lose something no matter how you do it. But there is a freshness and a dynamism to it, when actors are playing off each other. That's all I'm trying to say.
Definitely. So speaking of giving and taking with Transformers, the movie, for a lot of us fans, it's a cult classic, obviously. But, for you guys on your end, it was a financial bomb, box office, slaughterhouse, I guess is what ended it. Do you think that was the catalyst that ended up killing Sunbow in a way, or like?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I'd say about four things in response to that. Mm-hmm. I like four different ideas. I wish I could say them all at the same time, but I'm not. I'm not one of the voice actors, so I can't. I think number one is it was a bomb, but it was a bomb against expectations as opposed to necessarily doing badly. I mean, in other words, I don't think they had a realistic notion of what it would likely make in the theater. Because there's a lot of things nobody had ever done before. I mean, nobody ever said, "Hey, we're going to take a TV show and make a movie out of it," and people are going to go see it, because TV in those days, people didn't expect to pay for it, right? And Transformers was TV. Secondly, it was really a fans movie. Thirdly, it was not a children's film, and that was very much by design. I mean, we didn't kill people in the regular TV show, right? At fire, but that was a legal problem. And
he didn't actually die in the cartoon. He just disappeared. He stopped showing up.
Yeah, he had a mysterious disappearance with not a death. He's a cold case. But anyway, and then the movie certainly disappointed Hasbro. A lot of things were going on at the same time. Stephen Hassenfeld was dying at that point, and we didn't know it. But that it's Hasbro's Hassenfeld brothers, right? Right. And so obviously they were replanning what they're going to do with the company. good. There were a lot more regulations, and there's legislation, and there was always hovering around. And you could tell the toy show era for us was ending. And
gotcha.
So the movie certainly didn't help. Okay.
So really it was in a way it was Hasbro. Like, I mean, because the movie didn't do well, so the finances weren't there to continue with their shows. But then on top of that, it kind of sounds like along the lines of like that because of what happened in the back end of Hasbro, that, you know, I guess because a lot of people had said that the guy who took over was his brother, and his brother wasn't liked in Hasbro, from what some people have said.
I mean,
I'm not trying to.
There's nothing wrong with his brother, but Stephen Hasselfeld was a genius. Not everybody gets to be a genius,
right?
It really was, you know. And Alan was just a different guy. And I think that Stephen, knowing, you know, that he wasn't going to be around forever, I think sort of set up the company and set up the changeover in such a way that it wasn't a big risk. They weren't going to take big risks. Now, what I don't really believe is the movies weren't that expensive. I mean, Transformers is the first $1 billion toy line in history.
Right.
And at that exact moment, Hasbro had 3 phenomenon going. They had Transformers, G.I. Joe, and My Little Pony. Those are all huge. I don't think that the company said, "Oh, the movie bombed, so we're going out of business." I think, you know, they just, as I said, it was the perfect storm. Like, I don't know that there had been another Transformer movie if it had done well.
Right. I mean, even if it did well, like, it kind of sounds like along the lines of like that they needed to tighten their belts, and they were just like, well, you know, these shows are too expensive. We're just going to cut them. And they only did one G.I. Joe show with Dick, you know, and not many people like that version of G.I. Joe, but they still got Chris Latta for Cobra Commander to return. But
G.I. Joe Extreme or something like that, or
it was the Dick series where like they turned Serpentor into a snake, and they turned Cobra Commander back into a man, and he was in like a scuba suit. And
it was really funny. At that point, I was writing movies for Steven and stuff, but they called me in. I went into the first meeting, and that was another one of those you can never go back kind of, you know. I mean, it wasn't Sunbow, it wasn't Jay and Joe, it wasn't, you know. I mean, I helped some of my friends get scripts,
right,
for writing for it, and yeah, you know, but you know, it was over. They were going in another direction, and there's just like, you know, it's like, hey, I did that.
It just wasn't worth going back to. Yeah,
and I love G.I. Joe. I mean, because people associate me with Transformers, you know, they think that's all I did. But you know, G.I. Joe, I did just as much on that.
Because you're Flint. So
I have a strong vested interest. Yeah, you'll notice the episodes I did, Flint's like getting promoted, and he's like a main guy, and then, you know, if Buzz or Steve, especially Buzz, you know, was doing episodes, Flint
actually technically showed up in an episode of Transformers. He showed up in the Killing Jar as Marissa's father.
Yes.
And, you know, he shows up. It's the same voice actor, but he's older now.
Yeah.
And, you know, but then it turns out to not actually be him.
Remember, I did not remember that.
Yeah, okay.
I remember that. Another crack. Yeah, okay. Flint and Killing Jar. I'm writing that down because I'm trying to. Somebody was asking me recently about what we were going to do, where we would have gone if there had been the fourth seasons, and what we would have done if, you know, because the crossovers were things we snuck in there. You know, the Fairborn was, you know, we snuck that in there, you know, because nobody was actually reading the card saying, "Oh, Flint's real name is Fairborn." Okay, you know, so we just, and nobody cared. I mean, you know, it wasn't like we were violating.
Kids did, but
you know, yeah. But I loved. I mean, we all thought of them as the same world because, like, in the same day, I could be editing Transformers and writing a G.I. Joe, or, you know, vice versa. But I'm sorry, you were asking me something. I'm kind of nonlinear, so
I'm just as nonlinear. We go on tangents. Like, I'm very much parallel to you in so many ways. So, like, it's kind of crazy. I think I like, you know, I almost kind of sometimes think to myself, like, I'm Rodimus, you know, like, you know, going off on a tangent or thinking of something else differently. Like, it's just very much the same. Like, you know, it's kind of like the character that you wrote. So, But like you were saying, like what would happen if so we were bouncing off in 6 different places with Flint and G.I. Joe, and it's fun stuff because the movie itself was a financial disaster, but fans absolutely love it. We still love it. We still love watching it, and we talk about everything. Like I have a friend, we talk about everything within the movie all the time, and from different things to like like I said, my favorite character being Rodimus Prime. Even though he's hated by so many fans, and like there's so many fans that love him, like myself, and there are fans that absolutely despise him. Like just
they loved Optimus, and if you do change like that, you're going to get that reaction.
Yeah,
it's always going to happen, and I tend to look at it the way I think of it is, at least people care.
Yeah.
If it was some show nobody cared about, Spanko just replaced, Floggy, and nobody cares, that would be bad.
Yep.
I mean, we knew, Optimus was, we sort of knew it and didn't know it. I mean, that's a weird thing because, we, from our perspective, there are 135 Transformers. And we with the big ones where you have Optimus and Bumblebee and Megatron and Starscream, and you have the high people. But we thought of them all as being is this product line that kept evolving. Because our life was, we would get faxes that would say, please include dipstick and ashtray into this script and delete hubcap and gear shift. And we just, put the characters in there. We were used to characters. This was not apparent to the viewers.
Mm-hmm.
The toys got discontinued. And at the end of the day, it was a half-hour commercial. That having been said, it was the most creative freedom you'll ever get.
Yeah.
It was certainly not like I felt hobbled by the reality of the medium I was working in.
Yeah, and because people really cared about Optimus Prime, but I looked at Rodimus as like he's the imperfect leader, and that's something to like. Optimus was this Superman. You put him on a pedestal, right? But Rodimus was the guy that's like I'm Rodimus. I mess up. I screw up. I want to give up. I want to give in. I want to say screw everything and just quit. Like I'll give an example. Quit YouTube. I'll stop doing this and whatever. But you think about like you just keep on fighting, and that's Rodimus's character. Like he
selected him. The Matrix never really fit in Ultra Magnus.
Right.
And Ultra Magnus in every extrinsic way would have been a natural successor, but Matrix didn't pick him. And Rodimus was the real thing, but he would have to grow. And we thought it would be really interesting in season 3 to have a leader who had to grow into the role of being the leader.
Right.
Now, that's like literary stuff, that may not be perfect for toy shows, but at the same time, would Optimus have been would we remember him as well if he hadn't gotten killed in the movie?
Probably not.
An interesting question.
Yeah. If anything, it made people appreciate Optimus more.
They liked him.
Yeah. And it made those that liked Rodimus like him that much more because he had to grow. That was, like I said, like that was me. Like I appreciated that as an adult. And I think you have said before that if you did a season 4, you would have maybe had Rodimus had a retribution arc kind of thing, or something.
Well, not really retribution, but what would have been fun to do is Optimus is back, right?
Right.
He's the unquestioned leader of the Autobots. I don't know who gets the Matrix. That would have been like blood would have been spilled over. The Matrix would have die. But let's say let's take that issue off the table. I would have put Rodimus on the road because season 3 and Rodimus' season was all very not Earth based,
right?
Because the toys themselves, once again, we have the reality of the toys. You look at a triple changer and it's like, turns into what? It turns into, they're space toys.
Mm-hmm.
They're abstract toys. They're not a boombox.
Yeah.
Of course, well, you know what a boombox is, but I wonder if younger viewers even know what a boombox is.
I explain it pretty well in my. I did a Soundwave video, and I've done the Megatron video. I've done a Rumble and Frenzy video. So like it, I'm sure the fans that watch my show probably know. Have me explain what a micro cassette recorder is.
Yeah, I know. It's funny how because that's the other great thing about the '80s is there was just all this weird technology that only existed for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
But it was great. I mean, people had a great time with boom boxes.
Ghetto blaster.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, they carry them around. Nowadays people are wearing, earbuds, then you had your music and like everybody within 300 yards was hearing it. And there was something good about that because you like heard everybody's music. There's music all over the place.
Yeah. People breakdancing in the street.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
So, but like, as we were saying, like you were saying, Rodimus would be on the road somewhere.
Oh yeah, I'd say I would have sent Rodimus on an Odyssey, and Optimus would have been doing the Iliad. It's basically the way I thought of it.
Okay.
And that's the way it would. That's the way it would have gone. And you one way or after, and in the perfect world, you somehow would have the Joes in there and the humans, and you bring a little bit of Earth to space.
Gotcha. Because I think I expressed to you before that like how I feel like Rodimus kind of grew throughout season 3. So probably if he became a leader again in season 4 of either a squad or beginning the Matrix or whatever, the story might have actually in reality gone. I'm guessing that you probably would have had him now a little bit more confident.
I think he would have definitely been a grown character, but he would have been different than Optimus. Because Optimus is a fully realized, fully mature person.
Right.
Optimus wouldn't get to that; he'd just be at the peak of his career.
Okay.
It's and those are two different things, and they're both good things.
Yeah, one of the lines that you wrote in or had in Five Faces of Darkness that Rodimus says, he's like, "Last big party of the summer, folks. Let's go out with a bang." And Ultra Magnus is like, "Kiss once. Can your attitude reflect the gravity of the situation? Not if I can help it." And that's like what
wanted to make the guy.
Yeah.
You wanted him at this point, and that probably reflected a little bit how we were feeling. The show was ending.
Right.
Do it, and the whole era was in. We could feel it. We didn't know it for sure, but we could feel it.
And that's how you ended up moving out of writing for the cartoons and ended up going into gaming, or what was it you ended up going into after that? Like,
okay, after that, I went to work. I went to work on Garbage Pail Kids for CBS, and that was a disgraceful experience. And then and didn't work out too well. Then I went to work, wrote a bunch of stuff for Steven Spielberg for a number of years. But at that exact same moment, games were like electronic games were becoming real.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, I can actually write for games, not just design, but I can write.
Right.
So that's that era I was doing a lot of game design for TSR. We did the Buck Rogers game, a bunch of them. We did the role-playing game. We did the Battle for the Future. We A Line in the Sand, which was a Gulf War game for the first Gulf War that shipped day and date when the war started.
Wow.
Thing of working with the military, but this is all after the book, so that'll be in
the yeah. I was just kind of curious, like where your career has led you, because obviously it's you're still involved in some stuff, but and then everybody knows you from writing the IDW Autocracy trilogy as well too. So
that was okay. The Autocracy trilogy was literally I was working on a game because I've done games and movies and books since then, but I was working on a game called Diablo 3. And I was working with a guy named Chris Metzen, who was Warcraft, StarCraft, and Diablo. For non-gamers, this gets really geeky fast. And one day we're sitting there, and Metzen was like, he's probably about your age. He grew up watching this stuff. Maybe it's that much. And like his office looked like a shrine to my career in the 80s. He had the original, bubble pack GI Joes. He had all the Transformers. And one day he turned around in a chair. Yeah. Well, this was like a shrine. This was like a toy store. And so, because I can only see your comics and stuff.
Okay. You want me to start bringing some stuff out? I can start bringing out the Rodimuses and.
Yeah, you got stuff. All I'm seeing is posters.
Right. I mean, I got stuff all over the place too. Like I got everything everywhere. Like it's this is my my lair, not my dungeon, my lair, as you put in the book.
Anyway, Metzen turned around one day and said, "Hey, would you do a Transformers graphic novel with me?" And, yeah, sure. because I'd done a couple Transformer games after this. I did the first Michael Bay movie Game with Traveler's Tales. I did a game that never shipped from Activision and Treyarch. I think it was Treyarch. I could be wrong about that. And I did another game for Gygax that I don't know if it ever came out. It was a Massive World game.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been kind of a little bit in Transformers world a number of times after that period. But Metzen said, "Hey, if you want to do an it's IDW continuity," and I was like, "Okay, as long as you lead me through that," because he knows all this stuff. He knows what's happened in 35 years of comic books since. I only every once in a while stick my ladle in, but I'm basically a G1 guy. Right. So he said it was going to be a 22-page graphic novel, and he just had to get it out of his system. And this guy's running the biggest game company in the world, maybe the best. And he's just about to this whole period he did Overwatch, and so okay, yeah, 22 pages, I'm in. 400 pages later, with Autocracy and Monstrosity, or 350, or how many pages it was, and Livio was incredible. I mean, we got done with it because Chris wasn't getting paid to do it because he couldn't take money, and I felt bad being paid to do it. So we're just, it's like 400 pages of just doing it. And it's like, I think we're done now.
And, well, it was a good trilogy. It was the whole thing, flowed together well. And there were points where I'm sitting there trying to pinpoint where either it was your writing or it was his writing. Like in other words,
say the first book was a pretty good mix, but I was really rusty, and Chris really brought me up to speed on Transformers, and mm-hmm. very, very nicely, because my ideas are really good 1986 ideas, and I think that we brought some of that to the book, mm-hmm. But I didn't know about all the other stuff.
Gotcha.
And the second book I would say was probably more Chris than me, because I was busy doing other stuff. But we were all involved in all of them. So what I'm saying, and the third book, Chris was really deep in on Overwatch and just said, "Hey, guys, you got to take it." So that was a lot Livio, because the other thing you have to remember is Livio just came out with a new comic book, and I always forget the name of it, but read it.
Okay, I think it's. I heard it was good. I haven't read it yet, but
it's shockingly good. Writer.
He was. I met him at New York Comic Con. I think it was last year.
What a great guy!
Yeah,
Livio held the whole thing together. He was, he's fantastic, and we're still doing stuff. We've done stuff since then. He's great.
And so I guess it's a matter of who did what, but then, but just taking a shift back, because I know a lot of fans have asked me. Go ahead.
No, I'd say the answer to the question is, it's like Beatles songs, where there's sort of a Paul song and there's sort of a John song, but they were better than the other ones because both of them, would add that little thing to the song that made it a Beatles song, not a John Paul song. It was like that.
Gotcha. Okay, so a little bit of all three of you in all three books.
Well, Livio was there the whole time,
right?
And Chris and I would, it was like a teeter-totter, and so at different times, but everybody was there the whole time.
Gotcha. And it worked. It worked as far as the story is concerned, because it was very much you can literally sit down and read the whole thing, the whole trilogy as one story.
Yeah.
That's how it.
One story. Yeah. That was
Lord
of the Rings or something.
Yeah. It flows very, very, very good in that respect. One of the.
We did not know we were writing a trilogy when we started. We thought we were writing a 22-page graphic novel. Then it's okay, we'll do a couple more episodes. We didn't plan out some massive arc until at some point in the middle of Monstrosity. We knew, we're strapped in for a while.
The other thing is I think it was the end of Autocracy was where we had a Rodimus redemption, so to speak, where
okay, obviously with me, I got my own issues with validating Rodimus. So I've had a lot to do with Rodimus.
Okay. Yeah, and it's like I said, he's my favorite character. So you'll always see me trying to defend him, even when people are saying it's all his fault, He's a secret Decepticon. And I'm like, no, he wasn't.
No, I was defending him too.
Yeah, so I've always gone out of my way, and I've literally spent like 30 something years, defending the character. So, so to this day, one question that got brought up at a TF Con and you had answered and is in the movie and gets asked probably all the time is the old question, and is one of my oldest videos too, is who became Cyclonus?
Yeah, I have to get somebody. I have to make up a really good fake answer to that. I mean, what you got to figure is the reality of making the film. I mean, I probably Ron did the first draft, but it wasn't really, it was Ron was getting everybody's wish list. So that's the first draft, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how writing really works.
Right.
Then I probably did probably 10 things you would call drafts and 10 more things you'd call polishes and stuff like that afterwards. And by the time you're the 15th time through the script, you don't even remember what's there and what's not there.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with a specific problem, not to mention the fact you have the realities of production. And that is, we got to cut 10 minutes. We have to do this. So if there was an explanation ever to that, I've long since forgotten it. Now, hopefully I'll find my magic box. And
if you actually watch my video on it, I kind of go over all the little skivvy details, and I my answer has always been Skywarp. So, and it makes the most sense just based upon the character.
Well, I'd also ask it another way: why wouldn't it be?
Right.
You know what I mean? In other words, I mean, that is a good, I mean, what do we say? Somebody making a Thundercracker argument,
Thundercracker became Scourge and Skywarp became Cyclonus, and the sweeps were the Insecticons. So
that makes sense. Cause I mean, you got this trinity of characters and it's not Starscream.
Right.
Who's it gotta be? It's gotta be Skywarp.
Yeah. There you go. So, all right, guys, you guys heard it.
Answer now, because what I will tell you is that's exactly how I would have thought of it at the time.
Mm-hmm. That makes the most sense.
I thought of them as a trinity, because remember when they first came out, there were three of them, three F-16s.
Yep.
And we're well aware what happened to Starscream.
he got disintegrated.
What happened to Thundercracker? Then that leaves Skywarp. Just what's the other option?
Yeah, and that's the thing. The debate. Fans still want the debate to go. Like here, it's like I love that the debate is still going. Right?
Even this window of I don't exactly remember, but that would have been probably how we were thinking.
Yeah, and like I said, it makes the most sense. At the end of the day, without having to think too hard into it. Just thinking about connecting the dots to where they need to go. And the other question, because I know you, time might be, hard, difficult because I know you have to be on the Conza couch.
Yeah. Throw me on 5 minutes. Let's get. And also too, I'm not like planning on dying anytime soon, so I can come back.
Okay. All right. So, and the other question that people were asking about was because you had just actually kind of mentioned it was how you had to cut 10 minutes, you had to cut 5 minutes here. There are a lot of scenes in the storyboards that were not in the movie and showed extra character deaths that some people have always wondered about and wondered, did those characters actually die, or did those characters,
if you see them die, you don't have a body either. You have no proof of death. That's the answer to that. But what I will tell you is that there existed a draft that I cannot find.
Secret of Cybertron.
And everybody died in that. And we were really torn. If it's a discontinued product, do we kill it? Do we just not say what happened to it? Do we keep it around because maybe they'll undiscontinue it? So there was that issue, but there was also just, at a certain point, and even I saw this with Secret of Cybertron, is a certain point, there's too much.
Right.
You don't want to wipe out the entire 85 product line, So, but I don't, I mean, let me put it this way. I would imagine if there were a magic box behind me is my storage area. If there were a magic box full of every draft of Transformers that there ever was, which there isn't, that box doesn't exist, and all out of,
It also has your Secret of the Seven Souls.
I like those lost things, because when you've been doing this for a long time, you have a lot of lost stuff. And But the two big ones are Scepter of Seven Souls, which I think I have bits of. Oh, you know what I did find though? I did find the pilot for the would have been. Oh, I can't get it to show right. Anyway, what the pilot for what would have been the second season of Inhumanoids.
Wow,
that was a cool thing to find. That it's a pilot, and I think some version of the second episode. So there's weird stuff because I usually don't throw stuff away if I think this will be kind of cool to find in the future. But the most of the miscellaneous drafts probably only exist in kind of very old, probably redeemable Macintosh discs. Because I wrote a lot of drafts. They flew me out to New York, and I stayed there for like 6 weeks, and at the Grand Hyatt, and we just like a draft, or they change scenes every day. Some of the long drafts weren't really drafts.
Okay, so like there was like a lot of stuff that should, like, I don't know, like that could have been made but never got made. Like an Inhumanoids season 2 was one that I'm sure a lot of,
like we really had gone into pre-production on it.
Okay.
That like there was no talk ever of a second season of Visionaries, but Inhumanoids, you had new characters we were introducing and all that. I mean, that was really that was like a plug that was pulled. That wasn't a speculation.
Yeah, in Humanoids, what I remember, like obviously reading from what your interviews and from what it says in the book was that the reality of the toy made it impossible for it to continue.
Well, I may have the numbers wrong, but the other thing you have to understand, that's why there are multiple answers to a lot of questions. I mean, the reality was Inhumanoids did, I think, somewhere between $70 and $80 million of business the first year.
Mm-hmm.
Toy line did that now the year, you know what I mean, in its debut year. But then they had all these phenomenon going. It's like, oh, that's not enough, and also just the reality of the toy is they were not fun toys. They're really cool to look at,
okay,
and all that, but they don't have a lot of play value. They had a concept that the larger Inhumanoids, Metlar, Tendril, and Decompose, were play sets and figures at the same time.
Okay.
Remember, the whole genius of Transformers is that a Transformer was a vehicle and an action figure at the same time.
I got here, and I'm just going to show them to you, is the Skyflyer toy. He actually, yeah. And the backpack can actually hold characters inside.
Well, that's exactly what I was talking about, and that, that's, we all know what the obvious implication of that is.
Is that like the cost of it is too much? But with that was a whole legal battle. That was like that character in particular was a whole legal battle that ended up screwing the character over. But that's what ended up happening to him. But you think about Inhumanoids or any of the shows, like sometimes like they're a hit. And sometimes they're they're not, and sometimes some of us fans don't remember some of these shows that only lasted a season.
Well, there's two different things. What was interesting at that point, at that moment in Sunbow's life, is there was no show I was working on that wasn't number one unless it was 2 or 3 to the other ones I was working on. I mean, that was how dominant that was, and right. Even. Robotics and Humanoids, Gem were all premiered on a thing called Super Sunday. That right. was the highest rated show in its slot, and the third highest in the category. I mean, it may have been duking it out with My Little Pony. I don't remember the particulars, but the way so unsuccessful is a very relative term. If it had been any other toy company, they would have thought these were highly successful. That's what I'm saying with the movie. How much does the movie bomb, and how much is they had expectations that weren't realistic?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the expectations for that, I wonder if they were really that much higher but it was, you had even said that fans were, I mean, it was more of a fans movie, and so.
I mean, it was totally a fans movie, but here's the deal. It wasn't. Doing movies, an animated movie of a TV show was such uncharted territory at that point.
Mm-hmm.
that we were just making it up. What I think came out of it was certainly a film that to this day satisfies the fans. So if you look at it over the long term, it was an extremely successful film.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was a successful film in the sense that fans embraced it and loved it. Some people consider it the ending to Transformers. I liked Five Faces of Darkness despite its animation flaws. And I loved season 3.
My favorite fantasy is I want to go back and remaster that and like fix all the shots, put in the scenes that never made it into the because at that point things budgets had been cut. It was the relationship between Hasbro and Marvel was really rocky. And I mean, Sunbow and Marvel, and there, it was almost like people weren't trying. The actors were trying, and the writers were trying, and all that. But the animation, they just gave it to some cheap house, and they didn't want to do retakes, and we were pressed for time. And I would love to go back, reopen that coffin, and shorten it and trim it and make it a true sequel to the movie, because that's what it was intended to be.
I mean, I still think it could work as 5 episodes, but then again, if you just cut out the in-betweens and just make it like one long story, but you could, like, I would love to see it expanded,
I just want to reanimate some of the stuff. It could be expanded because undoubtedly the original scripts were longer. I mean, they always got.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I wrote, as close to time as any writer. That was just, just because I did. But I'm sure there's a ton of stuff that was cut out.
Yeah, I mean,
some of the stuff in Five Faces of Darkness was stuff that was supposed to be in the movie.
Yeah, and now, I mean, Transformers lore has grown so much that I would love to see some of the stuff from the later lore that even was retconned into the G1 cartoon brought into Five Faces, because you guys talk about the origin of Transformers and the Quintessons. And apparently there is an expansion that there is a Primus and Unicron brother, like the brothers, like just like your Secret of Cybertron that ended up being like that. And imagine like having like the core of Cybertron is still Primus, but he was actually, like, let's say like a god, that the Quintessons came and manipulated the planet, and then they're the ones that built the factory. Like that would expand the story and make it work within the origin that you created.
Great idea, because we had a number of different ways sort of explaining the origin. All of them work. It's like you read real Genesis in the Bible, and there are different explanations for the creation of Earth back to back.
Right, Genesis 1, Genesis 2, yeah.
Genesis 2. Okay, now you go to, so there were sort of, I would love to do all that stuff. I mean, I'm no enemy of interpolating and filling in the holes and even going and seeing stuff, really early on that you'd see later and become important in Transformers.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was saying why I always wanted to put Rodimus on the road was just because I wanted to see the rest of the world, and like, I'm sure there were like, Transformer, Amazon woman, because I you know what I mean, and it says you find some Amazon tribe, Alexander the Great, they're just all an endless adventures you go off and do, and then you sort of have this unending civil war, and you figure out how to go back and forth and from Earth.
Yeah. Were you off of Transformers by the time of what was considered season 4, well, like the 3-part episode, like that ended the cartoon, or?
Well, Marv effectively, it was never put that way, but effectively replaced me at the end of, season 3. Okay, I wrote all of Five Faces of Darkness, probably plotted out all the episodes, or at least did springboards for them. Mm-hmm. Probably edited 5 of them. Maybe wrote a couple later on, but I was off on Visionaries at that point.
Okay.
That was my main focus. So, I was kind of juggling between those two things.
Gotcha. So like by the time that they made season 4, go ahead.
But by the time they were doing season 4, I think in truth, Marv was, I think, the last technical employee at Sunbow West.
Right.
That's what he told me the other day. So I believe that.
Yeah.
probably still finishing out my script commitments on Visionaries and still going, still effectively functioning, like,
Gotcha.
sure.
So it was like
recordings and everything.
So by that point, it was like those last 3 episodes were pretty much made like just to like cap end the series kind of in a way.
Oh yeah, those 3 episodes came out of, the story about the kid. That was the other thing too, and we didn't even touch on that. But there's this, maybe I'm convinced apocryphal story about a kid that locked himself in a bathroom for a week.
Mm-hmm.
And some letter came to Hasbro, and that was almost as bad as the financial. That was the real coup de grace. That's what people got mad about, and Hasbro was mad, and that how could you have killed Optimus Prime? As if we did that. And that was the first time there was real friction. I'm sure there was internal, there was all sorts of human stuff going on too. But yeah, there was a story that a kid had locked himself in the bathroom for a week because Optimus got killed.
Right.
I bought that story hook, line, and sinker when I was 27 years old, or 29, or however old I was doing that. However, now having been a parent, okay, my kid was locked in the bathroom for, I don't know, 6 minutes.
Yeah, no, definitely. I have 2 small kids myself, so yeah.
I mean, but I believe that story.
And so that was the return of Optimus Prime, but then there was another 3 episodes after that David Wise wrote, and that was
know anything about those.
Okay, so by that point,
Wise just died too, and that was really sad.
Yeah, and by that point, so there was nothing left of Sunbow, basically, like with Hasbro.
There was by the time Return of Optimus Prime, Sunbow was running on on like battery power. Is my
okay. So that
commitments.
Okay, so that was probably like where they knew they needed to cap end the series. They didn't just want to leave everybody hanging,
right?
And so they created a final finale that didn't even air in Japan, apparently. Like the yeah.
I didn't know about that till this moment.
Yeah, it was re-aired later, but it's called The Rebirth. It took place after the return of Optimus. They had like all the headmasters. Their heads came off and turned into so like David Wise had like for every single Transformer there was a human inside. So you had that many characters to deal with, and so like
a really weird anomalous thing. I don't know anything about it. I mean, because headmasters came in. I mean, that's when like it's like I'm off doing 500 other things and paying no attention.
You're probably on Garbage Pail Kids by that point.
On Garbage Pail Kids the same time I was doing Visionaries. I was probably writing Fievel or Tiny Toons or
Okay. Fievel Goes West. I love both of those movies, both of the American Tail movies. So, and I remember like being so like loving that movie, and it's not Disney, which is interesting because you had talked about how in the 80s animated films were not as well received as others, and
well, also too there's a phenomenon, and you're part of it, and that was called the baby boom echo. And remember, the baby boomers were the biggest demographic bulge in American history, right? Born right after World War II,
right?
Came home from World War II. Well, there was an echo, and that was the baby boomers having kids, and that hit in the late 80s,
right?
And so you were one of them. I mean, you hit earlier than that, but the point is you were part of it.
Right.
So all of a sudden there was this massive market, but it was sudden for animated movies. And Disney was flat out brilliant. With it started, I guess, with Little Mermaid.
Little Mermaid was 89. And by that point, like all my favorite shows were over, so, and Disney just their movies in the 80s were just not as well received. And Ninja Turtles was a big thing too. Like Ninja Turtles came out in 87.
Bad shape, like around Black Cauldron, and I liked Rescuers Down Under, or whatever the Rescuers that came out in the 80s was. But because I mean I'm not really I didn't like flock to every animated movie there was. I mean, it's like I was probably the least tuned into that stuff of anybody I worked with.
Gotcha.
But by like Transformer, by Animation Geek standards, by real person standards. I was proud.
This has been an absolute blast. I got to tell you, like just being able to just like obviously and pretty much I was trying to follow the stuff that was happening in the book,
right?
Because I wanted to go through the D&D stuff. I wanted to go through the the Buck Rogers and Ruby Spears and Lucasfilm and G.I. Joe and Transformers and storyboards and stuff. And pretty much I hit my points, but we had.
If you miss stuff or people have more questions, as I said, I can come back. I mean,
yeah, and I had an absolute blast talking to you. And of course, I'll see you posting stuff. I'm glad you put try to keep the peace on Facebook, but
yeah, no, I mean, I don't think anybody misses it.
Mm-mm.
You know what I mean? It's just enough of that. I mean, what we need is I just want to talk about giant robots and secret societies and stuff like that. That's what we're doing.
And fun stuff, more fun stuff.
Yeah, well, there is more fun stuff coming up, so I will keep you abreast of it. But this is really a lot of fun, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. If you guys don't know, be sure to order the Gamemaster. In the description should be the Amazon link, which is the non-signed copy, and the Rare Bird link, which is the signed copy.
I just like it when people, they're the same price. I just like, and I'm happy to sign it. I like it when you give the little guy the business. I mean, it's not like Jeff Bezos and Amazon are hurting right now. So, if you can order it from those guys. And Livio drew the cover, by the way. We made me about that.
Yeah, I can tell his art style is that. And you said this was your picture?
Yeah, that was me. It's actually the only photo, only extant shot of me taken by a real photographer, face on, up from that period. And it was shot with my then girlfriend, and like we just cut her out and put it in the front of the book.
You always want to cut out the ex-girlfriend.
I'll end up that particular one I talked to last week. Yeah, we get along fine. But it was really kind of a cool thing the way they did it, and Livio just did a great job putting that together. And the quotes on the back are also really interesting, just for who they're from, and because they were all people except Chris. They're all people I knew in the day. They're all people in the book.
I think the version I have doesn't have the quots.
Oh man, you got the okay. I got where's my version? Oh, my version's right here. My version. Let's see. Paul Dini wrote one.
Okay.
Frank wrote one. Linda Wolverton wrote one. They're in the Amazon description of the book. Luke Gygax wrote one, and Chris Metzen.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah. Cool. Mine isn't a advanced reader's copy, so it has some.
You have the really rare tropical. That's basically the galley.
Yeah, pretty much. I have like the early version, basically.
You have the rare tropical one. You just didn't get the quotes in the back.
I'll find another way to get it. Maybe I'll pick up the signed copy or something.
Well, people will be able to go out in the real world, and I'll just give you one at some convention.
There you go. But like I said, it was an absolute blast talking to you. I do want to end the stream because I know that you have to get on to Con to Couch.
Oh, that's right. I got to start thinking about that. All right. Hey,
yeah.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, guys. You guys have an awesome day. Thank you very much. I know some of you, I haven't answered some of your questions. I do have more videos coming down the pipeline. Flint will be on again. And as always, guys, until next time, till all are one.